Thank you very much for that warm introduction. It is, of course, a privilege to be here. I feel I'm among more than just friends, but family. And I know so many faces out here. Some I don't, and that's possibly a good thing. That means I get a fresh start from anything that might have gone before me associated with my name. So it's good to be here. But more than just being among family, when you feel the presence of God somewhere, it feels like home. And that, for me, is even more precious. So I want to share, of course, the Word of God with you today. So if you could just turn to Genesis 32. We're going to look at some thoughts from a very strange, or at least rather strange, point in the narrative about a guy called Jacob. I'll read that in a minute. Just by way of introduction, Lucas, of course, has given me a bit of a lead in here. I pastored a church over in Monaco when God was giving out territories for mission. I did fairly well. And when you hear the word Monaco, of course, it's associated with wealth and influence and all of those kind of things. Now, people would assume that that always goes in your favour when you mention that you are connected to the place. Well, a little story happened to me in the transition from moving from the leadership I was in a church locally over to the church in Monaco. I had to transfer some money from an account in Monaco to an account in the UK. So I walked into my local Lloyd's TSB branch in Widnes, and I walked over to the cashier and I said, I need to make some transfers of money over the next few months from an account overseas. So I've heard that I need an international banking code. She said, that's correct, you've heard precisely right. And so where do you want to move your money from? I said, I need to move money from Monaco to the UK. She said, you do not need an international banking account. You need an international banking account. For somebody like you who's moving money regularly between Monaco and the UK, that's more in keeping with what I think your needs will be. So I said, okay, and I waited there. She went and got the manager of the Lloyd's TSB. So she said, will you please come into this room, Mr. Ackerman, isn't it? Up until that point, they hadn't used my surname. So it was Mr. Ackerman now, and I got moved into this little side room. And there I waited as another lady, the assistant to the bank manager, brought in tea and biscuits. So I'm sat there, looking at the biscuits, delightfully thinking I'm going to sup a cup of tea while I work through the formalities of this new account. And she said, the reason we believe that you need an international banking account rather than an international banking code is because you get to move money without any penalties financially. You can move money freely between the countries and you can just use that to your advantage. You're not having to pay any kind of a charge for doing that. So I thought, this is wonderful. This is the account that I want. I can move money freely between the two nations. No one's going to bother me for any charges. Lucas, who's a man of finance, would think that's wonderful because there's no money being lost in the transaction. So I thought, this is great. So what happened then was, she said, we need to make a phone call. So she says, I'm calling up wealth management of Lloyd's in London to complete your transaction. Up until this point, nobody has asked me how much money I need to move between countries. So I speak to Laura at Lloyd's in London, and she says, I am part of the wealth management team here, and I'm delighted to be able to help you and welcome you to this new season of banking, etc., etc. Lots of padding and nice words as I nibble on my rich tea. So she said, okay, we need to do some preliminaries now. I've got a list in front of me. Just bear with me, sir. It won't take a long time. You understand we have paperwork to complete. So I was quite comfortable, had my rich teas, had my cup of tea. I was fine. We got to about question 25. And she said, at this point, sir, I need to find out where you're going to translate your money from in terms of the actual bank. So I described the BNP Paribas bank in Monaco, and I gave her the details of the account there. And she says, now, is this the account you're going to make your first £25,000 deposit from? At that point, my rich tea didn't taste quite so good. I said, I don't have £25,000. She said, well, you need 25,000 because this account is only available to people who make a deposit of £25,000 or more. Now, I was a little bit embarrassed, but nowhere near as embarrassed as the bank manager was, who would just assume that because I was banking in Monaco, that I had enough money to pay for a few dozen international banking accounts. So she said, I'm very, very sorry, sir. There seems to have been a terrible error on my behalf. Please accept my apologies. And with that, she reached across the table and she pulled back the biscuits. This is a true story. She was more subtle than perhaps the story may lead you to believe. But the account is accurate. So I was left holding the last bit of tea in my finger. She didn't take that from me. I was holding on to what was probably my third free biscuit at that point. And she said, you of course need an international banking code. I thought, yeah? Oh, right, okay. So I received my international banking code and I made my transaction. But in my heart, as soon as she told me that there was an account available to me that was so much better, I was excited. I'd gone in for an international banking code. I'd been told I was probably eligible for an international banking account. But there was this obstacle of the £25,000, actually minus the €500 that I wanted to transfer. There was an obstacle of about £24,700 that I was shy of. So I needed this, and this obstacle was there. I thought, well, it would be great if someone made me a donation of £25,000 so I could open this account. But sadly, that didn't happen. Didn't happen. Well, you never know. They would take my donation. So this didn't happen. And in life, I found that quite often some of the frustrations that come my way and come people's way always seem to be located in our circumstances. It's the £25,000, or it's the person who doesn't recognise maybe the calling or the ability that you have in your life and seems to just kind of be holding you back. Or it's a reputation that you gained in your life that people don't let you lose. They kind of hold it against you far longer than it needed to have been. And you carry with you this sense that if I could only just get this dealt with, or only just do that, then my life would be complete. I could move freely into my destiny if circumstances would match up with my desires. But I found in those times of frustration, those times of pause, those times when things don't seem to be going my way or what I feel God's way should be in that circumstance, quite often those pauses are quite strategic in God's destiny for my life. And it's not about the resolution of the circumstances, but the growth of the person that God is interested in those moments. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, there's a famous verse, and it says, "He who began a good work in you will bring that to completion." And as I pause and reflect on that more and more, I start to learn to treasure the work that God wants to do in me more than the one that He wants to do through me. Because the effectiveness of what God does through me will be determined by the value of what God does in me. The greater work that God does in me as a person will mean that I am more valuable to the kingdom of God and what God does through me. And so with that in mind, we're going to turn to Genesis 32, if you haven't already, verse 22, with this instance of Jacob wrestling, it says in my NIV Bible, with God. Some people think it's an angel. Some people reduce it to a man who was working on behalf of God. We're not going to go into that today, as much as maybe some of you would like to. We're just going to kind of keep simply to the development of the story itself and some points we can take from it. So in verse 22 it says, "That night Jacob got up, he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he also sent across his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, instead it will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is where I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." A little bit of context. Jacob is not known as a wrestler. Jacob is known as a deceiver. And in fact, his name, Jacob, carried with it the meaning of one who likes to get advantage over somebody else. And 20 years prior to this instance in his life, he steals a blessing from his father that was meant for his brother. And he didn't wrestle his brother for that blessing. He deceived his father in order to earn that blessing. Now, stealing a blessing may not sound a great deal to you and I, but attached to that blessing was the promise of land, of prosperity, of God's best. It's kind of like if you went into a will reading of a millionaire and there were two brothers and you knew that the oldest was going to get the millions and the younger was going to get some of the furnishings within the house, that you would feel rightly quite aggrieved that the eldest would get the best stuff while you were left filtering through what was left over. It's not the same getting the picture over the mantelpiece while your brother walks away with the big box. So because of this, Jacob has offended his brother. Offended him to the point that he says he's going to kill his brother. So on the advice of his mother, Jacob makes a dash for it and runs away. While he's running away, God meets with him at a place called Bethel. And at this place called Bethel, not only has he now received the blessing of his father, he also receives the blessing of God. Not the blessing saying that I agree with what you're doing, but because of who you are and my plans for you, I am blessing your life. But still, despite receiving this blessing, this sense of calling and destiny, because God promises him that land and that he will have a great number of people coming from his line that will create a nation, he receives the blessing of God, the purpose of God, and is located in that place. But after this, despite that, he continues to run on his way. Over the next 20 years, he accumulates a couple of wives. Ironically, he is deceived getting his first wife. If you get a wife, you get a life. There we go. That's a new slogan. He deceives who would be his father-in-law. His father deceives him. Now he's the deceiver, and he's been deceived. But after a year or two of prosperity, he receives the wife that he went for. But eventually, because of the prosperity of his life, he realizes it's time to leave and go back home. And God calls him back. Now, it's the night before he meets with his brother. He hasn't met with his brother for 20 years. Now, you know, if you walked out of a house after a heated discussion with your wife, if I've been out of the house for an hour, it still could be quite hot. But if I leave the house for 4 hours, she's had a lot of time to stew. So you feel quite often to experience that the longer I leave it, the more chance this person has had to sit on the information and work out their strategy against me. So, 20 years he knows that his brother's been sat on this, maybe just waiting in his own way, praying that God would bring him back to receive the punishment that he felt maybe rightly due his brother for the actions that he undertook. So it's strange that the night before this encounter is ready to take place, that this man takes the opportunity to wrestle with Jacob. And in order for us to understand why he wrestled with Jacob, I want to start from the end. Now that may sound to you a little bit illogical, but like a crime scene, when you're not quite sure what happened, why the person or the individuals went into the crime scene to begin with, you work back from the end. What was the outcome of this encounter in order to know why the encounter happened in the first place? What was the result? And the first thing that happened, working from the back going forwards, is that Jacob received a new name. Now, there are times in life when we all want a little bit of a change, maybe an update in our style. When I moved to Monaco, I felt that I needed to buy myself one of those kind of boating jackets, because they were very popular in Monaco. I have resisted so far, and there is no boating jacket in my wardrobe, because my wife's opinion on my wardrobe is more important to me than peer pressure from the people in Monaco. But I felt this need to dress differently. And Adam Deller and I have this theory that when women get married, they tend to cut their hair short. Has he mentioned to you about the marriage bob? Usually within a month or two of getting married, there's this sense in which, well, I'm married now, I need my appearance to be as sophisticated as my new role in society as a responsible wife. So I'm getting my hair cut short into a bob. And that kind of helps me get this new sense of identity. That I mean, my wife has not bobbed her hair so far, so we are bucking the trend. Nor has Anna, who is Adam's wife, of course. She hasn't got that. Sarah, did you cut your hair shorter?
Only out of frustration.
Only out of frustration. Just wanted
Not
to...
hair, not my husband.
Oh, I don't even feel I need to clarify. Obviously, you felt that needed clarifying. That's okay. I'm a counsellor too. We'll spend some time after talking. So, there are times in life when we feel that our identity needs an upgrade. Now, if you came home one night, guys, and you found that your wife had a new haircut, maybe a few new items in her wardrobe, that's not time to worry. Now, if you come home and she's changed her surname and her passport, that is time to worry. Because you recognise that the change of name is something extremely significant. This is not just an upgrade in style, this is a radical departure from who you saw yourself as before. You have completely transformed yourself to be associated with whichever name that you have taken on. Now, in ancient cultures, when you were given a name, it carried with it not only a sense of prestige, particularly if your household had a good reputation, but it came with all of the story that your family had inherited up to that point. For example, if your grandfather, your great-grandfather had achieved something great, then you, by proxy of being related to them, you would inherit that sense of favour. But on the flip side, that if your family had done something of shame, you would also inherit that too. You'd be, did you realise what happened to the grandfather of so-and-so? Now the whole family is tainted with their shame. Now, in a modern Western culture, we tend to overlook some of these things, and we recognise the person rather than the patronage or where they've come from. We recognise the individual over the family, or at least you hope people do. But certainly in those ancient cultures, that wasn't that quick and easy distinction. And Jacob, although his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather carried a great deal of prestige, he himself had earned a reputation for being a deceiver, a cheat, and somebody who would manipulate circumstances. And it was that reputation that had gone before him and caused him anxiety, because although he was returning to his brother, his reputation had gone ahead of him. And he knew that he was in for problems because his reputation had gone before him. And so by God changing Jacob's name, he was saying, look, now it's time for a fresh start. I am going to wipe the slate clean with your life. Who you have seen yourself to this point as being is now going to be completely done away with. That reputation which you had earned and lived up to is now going to be transformed, and people will no longer know you by the negative labels that you have received, but a whole new label that God is going to place on your life. And for so many of us, when we become a Christian and we add that to our name. It's Lucas, the Christian. It's Rob, the Christian. What we're doing is we are associating ourselves with a new name. A name which becomes a positive label on our lives that should transform our sense of identity. That we are no longer subject to the reputations that we received in ourselves, but we are now associated with the reputation that God places upon our lives. And so, whereas we may have limited what we thought we could do for God based on what we had done until the point we are in, we no longer need to limit ourselves by the mistakes of the past, but God can give us new hope and a new future. If you read through the book of Revelation and you read the letters to the 7 churches, if you get to Revelation chapter 2, shall we read it? No, we'll leave it. Revelation 2:17 to the church in Pergamum. There's this strange little saying at the end, the last few verses, where it says, I will give you a new name, I'll give you a stone and a name known only to the person on which it is written. Now that sounds a bit odd, and there are lots of different ideas about why a stone with a new name would be given to the people of that church. But if you read the verses before, it talks about to he or she who overcomes. Now in ancient Greece, they started the Olympics. Most of you know that. Now if you were a prize winner in ancient Greece, you wouldn't get a gold medal, at least not when they started the games. They would give you a white stone. So for the victors, they were given a white stone. And there, forever you carry that white stone, you carry the victory associated with that white stone. So what I believe is happening in Revelation, drawing on some of the culture that they would have understood from the Olympics in that day, is that the association between overcoming and the name coming together with that means you get to carry your reputation invested in that overcoming. And what happened for Jacob was that for the rest of his descendants, they were going to be associated with his overcoming. They weren't going to be labelled with his disgrace, they were going to be labelled with his destiny. And when we come into contact with God and Jesus gives us his name, we are associated with his success, his triumph, his victory, his overcoming. And he gives us his name and puts it on the stone which is representative of his overcoming. What he has done, what he has achieved, is the single most important thing which you should go by to determine what you are capable of, not what you saw yourself doing up until that point. So he receives a new name. Now when I changed addresses a little while ago, I actually technically live in France. I'm not rich enough to live in Monaco, so with all of the other hoi polloi, I sit outside of the boundaries of Monaco itself. But we had a lot of stuff to reduce down. We moved from a 3-bedroom semi-detached house, which Lucas and Sarah actually used to own. Charlie Lord lived in that house. Anna has lived in that house, and maybe a few more people who have lived in that house here. It's been well used by the kingdom of God over the years. But when you move into a house, initially when you get married, you're thinking, how am I going to fill this space? There are lots of rooms, and we've only got the stuff on our wedding list, except for a few things that you bring with you. As a guy, it's a box for women, sometimes more than one box. And you move into the space, but quite quickly you're surprised how you spread into the space. So when you're moving from a 3-bedroom semi-detached house to a 1-bedroom apartment, which is 50 square meters, you have to make some radical decisions on what stays and what goes. Now you have to go through all of your stuff and decide what is most valuable for you to keep. And you have to be ruthless, because you know you're either going to live in clutter or you are having to make some sacrifices. And what I believe Jacob teaches us through this change of name, almost like a change of location and moving on into the destiny of God, is we look at where you're going rather than looking at where you've been as you decide what to keep in your life. As you filter through the accumulation of your experiences, your thoughts about yourself, what other people have said about you, filter stuff that you hold on to where God is calling you to rather than where he's called you from. Because if you always live in the way you've come from, you will never really fit into the way you need to go. Because we carry so much clutter within our souls of the stuff that life throws at us or we go through, and we never take that time to sift through. It's only an instance or a sudden change which can quite often shock us into making those difficult decisions. The changing of Jacob's name at this strategic point in his life was God saying, now no longer do I want you to take this stuff with you. Where you're going is more important than where you've been, and we're going to have to throw a lot of stuff out along the way. The next thing that happens, and I believe is important in figuring out why this happened to Jacob, is that where it says in verse 25, when the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched the socket of his hip, and the American Standard Version says he dislocated it. This is a strange thing, because people have struggled with this story about struggle, because if this is God in human form wrestling with Jacob, why could he not overpower him? Why could he not overwhelm him? Because even if Jesus had, or God, or you would say at that point, presented himself in human form, surely he had the power to overwhelm somebody like Jacob. And sometimes people struggle with what's going on in the story because they can't understand how God would be finding an even match in somebody like Jacob. In fact, when Hosea speaks of this in Hosea chapter 12, verse 4 and 5, he describes the fact an angel met with Jacob rather than just a man, and that adds another interesting dynamic to the story. But whoever is wrestling with Jacob, it seems odd that they couldn't overcome him. Unless you stop seeing this overcoming as being descriptive of the physical fight that they were in. Because if you read the rest of the verse, when it actually says he dislocated his hip, you could say he couldn't overcome Jacob, so he overcame him. Because actually he did stop the fight and draw it to a conclusion by dislocating the hip of Jacob. So he did bring it to an end. And probably if he had the power to do that at the end, he had the power to do that at the beginning. So for me, the overcoming isn't in reference to the actual physical conflict that is going on between the two people. I believe, given what we know about Jacob's past, he's testing to see what is really in the heart of Jacob. Jacob has only shown the deceptive side to his character. This guy, by wrestling with Jacob, wants to see Jacob rise up from within him and another side of his character. When he could say he saw that Jacob wasn't a pushover, when he couldn't overcome Jacob's courage and conviction and ability to rise up and fight in a moment when he needed that, and when he saw that come to the surface, at that time he brought the fight to an end because he had seen what he needed to see, and more importantly, Jacob had seen in himself what he needed to see. So I believe this overcoming and then the not overcoming is not to do with the physical conflict, but the discovery of what was really in Jacob's life and character. He'd never seen that side of himself before. He'd always labelled himself as the guy who goes on the run. And so the reason I believe that the angel, God, man, touched and dislocated the hip of Jacob in specific was because he was touching him at his point of greatest vulnerability. Jacob, when he was cornered, would tend to run in the other direction by touching his hip, saying, "You cannot run anymore." That season in life when you ran away from your problems has got to stop. I'm taking away from you the ability to rest on your old nature. I want you to rise up in your new nature. This Jacob, which I have just seen wrestle with me and not give in, and consistently wrestle to the point of daybreak and never let him go until he's blessed, this is the Jacob you now need to be in order to walk in your destiny. The Jacob that used to run in the other direction symbolized that his weakness of character was outworked through his running from on his legs was now taken away from him. So the touching of the leg was symbolic of the weakness in Jacob's character. But that needed to be dealt with. And no, not only had the person taught him a valuable object lesson by dislocating his hip, he's also now saying not only as that part of your life dealt with, you now need to learn to rely on me. And so many of us, when we're cornered or in a time of pressure, we go back to what we know. We go back to habits, lifestyles, things that we may have used as crutches to get us through life, and never learn to fully rely upon God. Jacob now had no other choice. He couldn't run, he couldn't hide. His brother knew he was coming, but he had to rely upon God. But not only had Jacob's reputation gone before him, the calling of God had also gone before him. Before Jacob ran away, God said, I want you back here. And if God says he wants you somewhere, no matter what else goes before you, God has a way of bringing things to pass. The trouble is, do we trust him to help us through the difficulties that we have to navigate in order to step into those seasons of life? There's a guy called J. John, who's a fairly well-known Anglican evangelist, and he was doing a series of lectures at Oxford University. And after this course of lectures, so the story goes, I wasn't there, he met one particular student, and the student said, I enjoyed what you had to say this week, but I feel that Christianity is a crutch. And you just come to believe that this God is real because he's useful as an idea to you to stop you dealing with the difficulties of life. Then J. John, in his witty Anglican way, says, I hope you break your legs. His point was that he didn't want to commit physical harm to this guy, but he's saying when you learn to realise how flawed all of us are, you learn to appreciate that God is a God who can help you through. He wasn't ashamed of the fact that he needed to lean on God to get him through the difficulties of life. It wasn't evidence of failure to not lean on his own strength, but lean on God's strength. But are we prepared to put ourselves in the position where we have to rely on God's strength? Now, I've preached lots of these different sermons about walking on water, taking God at his word, stepping out in faith. But it's a different thing to preach it than it is to live it. Now, it's easy to say, well, as a preacher, that you should live everything that you preach. Well, you do, but there are times when it's easier to do than others. And when we moved countries to Monaco, it was a big task. Now, it sounds great. You think you're going to be on the beach much of the week, doing your sermon preparation under a palm tree with the rumblings of a Ferrari engine behind you. It's not like that, I can wholly assure you. But the idea of where you're going is easier than the journey it takes to get there. Because suddenly you're in the wealthiest place in the world. And that means people aren't too worried if they charge €5 for an apple. Now, they don't charge €5 for an apple. This is an illustration. What I'm saying is that everything goes up where people don't have quite the concerns about money. But we weren't going to a place where our salary was in line with our context. So they were saying, will you come and help us repurpose this church? But by the way, you won't earn the type of salary that everybody else in Monaco is earning. And so therefore you won't get to do what everyone else in Monaco is doing. Now, at the beginning, this sounds a great thing to do, and because we are people of faith, we have faith vocabulary, you quickly say, well, money's not going to be an object. I trust Jehovah Jireh, my provider, and he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and therefore we'll be fine. Now, a cattle on 1,000 hills probably doesn't cost a lot of money these days. I think God needs to update his metaphors. But to trust God and take him at his word puts you in a place where God gets to be faithful to his word. And I believe if you can do what you feel that God has called you to do in your own strength, then you need to expand your understanding of what God's destiny is for your life. I'm not saying it has to be outrageously difficult. What I'm saying is that the evidence that God is calling you is that you can't do it without the strength of his call carrying you through. If what you think God has called you to do can all be done in your strength, then you rely upon yourself. You go through life resting on what you feel that you can do, in the way you feel that you can do it. And often in those times we tend to rely not just on our own strength, but go back to the habits and the things which we use as our crutch, rather than using God as our support to take us through. So I believe not only Jacob teaches us that we need to leave our past labels and negative associations behind and embrace the full reality of what it means to be labelled with God's name on our lives, but that also he takes us out of our comfort zone, removes from us those crutches that we've used, and allows us to rest upon him. So in conclusion, what I believe we've got when we want to understand this story of why the man wrestled with God is that he knew that the man that was about to meet Esau, the man that was going back into his destiny, was not the man that needed to be walking in his destiny. He needed to do something in that moment that changed the way of doing life for Jacob. Jacob was going back to his brother as partly the old Jacob. Of course, there had been some change when he had been in Laban's house and stuff had gone on and he had grown and matured, I'm sure. But still, there were things that hadn't been dealt with in Jacob's life up until this point. And one of the other evidences I present to you for this is that he had sent ahead of him lots of his herds and livestock. It was always like, can I buy my brother off? Can I give him stuff to soften the blow? He was again relying not on the call of God to figure this out, but the stuff that he could do to make this work out. He wasn't trying to deceive his brother, sure, but he was certainly trying to use everything that he could within his strength to make the situation right. But God knew that in Jacob, it wasn't his ability to pay ahead, it wasn't his ability to deceive or connive or use his grey matter to try and make the situation work. He had to be the type of guy who was a guy of courage, a guy of faith, a guy of commitment, a guy who would wrestle and struggle, and no matter what came in front of him, he wouldn't retreat to what went on behind him. Finish with this story. Maybe two stories if you like. The Cheyenne Indians in America, they used to have these warriors called dog warriors. And what a dog warrior would do, or was famous for, is that when they were in an area and they were going to fight, they would put a stake in the ground and they would have some leather that wrapped around their waist and was anchored to the stake. Now they had a radius of about 10 to 12 feet. And the point was that once you were anchored there, you couldn't lift the anchor. Only another soldier could take the stake out of the ground for you. You were saying that now I'm anchored here, I'm not going anywhere, I will die here, or I will win the battles here, but I can't go anywhere else. There's no retreat for me, there's no escape for me. The only thing I'm left to do is fight over the territory that has been allotted to me. That stake in the ground was either a guarantee of your success or the guarantee of your demise. Either way, you were anchored to that point. And so many of us, I believe, miss God's opportunity for his best for our lives because we up-anchor and re-anchor where we think it's safe rather than where God is placing us. We need to be people who are so anchored in a sense of God's destiny and purpose for our lives that we say, even if we die here, I ain't moving unless God picks up the stake and he says it's good to go. A guy called Commander Cortez, who was part of the Spanish invasion over to South America, particularly in Mexico, the story goes in the 16th century that when he went over there with his soldiers, he burnt the ships that they sailed in. And the reason he burned the ships they were sailed in was saying, conquer or die, it is your choice, but going back is not an option. And so I believe the story of Jacob, through its twists and turns and its rather strange encounter with this man, angel, God person, I believe it teaches us that what is ahead of us is always greater than what's behind us. We should never be the people who retreat back into our comfort zone, those habits, those things which have got us through life until now. We can only embrace the fullness of God's destiny for our life as we learn to rest and rely upon Him, which will be tested by whether we actually physically sometimes move, change, do stuff which puts us in the centre of where God wants us to be, rather than where we feel where it's safe to be. So if you allow me, I'd like to pray for you here. I'm nearly kept to my 35 minutes that I've been allotted. I'm going to pray just one particular prayer for you. I want you in your mind to think about those labels that you've carried until now, which might limit you being who God needs you to be. Someone may have labelled you as being shy. Someone may have labelled you as being aggressive. Someone may have labelled you as being a quitter. Someone may have labelled you as being too weak, or you're just this, or you are just that. What are those labels in your reputation that not only go before you in the ears and eyes of others, but in your own mind hold you back from stepping into God's best for your life? And what I want to pray is that as you, in your heart, you present them to God, that God enables you to walk free from those things of your past, so that you can be who God says you are capable of being, rather than circumstance, experience, or others have said you deserve to be or only can be. And in so doing, God can open up a whole new vista, a whole new horizon for you that was never thought possible based on who you thought you were. So Heavenly Father, we recognize that there is power in the cross of Jesus. It is only by you, through you, and in you that we can gain a lasting victory over the hurts, the habits, the hang-ups which have dogged our lives, that have marred our reputation, that have caused us to carry shame. And Lord, we believe that when we become a Christian, we become, the Bible says, a new creation. The old has passed, the new has come. But so many of us hold on to stuff from the past and try and carry it into the future. God, I ask that you help us sift through the labels, the stuff, the rubbish that we've accumulated and we believe is our possessions to take with us, and help us to rid our lives of that clutter. Will you help us, God, to spring clean our souls and our minds and our thinking, that we can get rid of everything that hinders, the writer of Hebrews says, so we can press on towards the prize and the goal which God has called us for. Like Jacob, I pray that everyone in here will know that Jesus, you go before them, before their reputation. That whatever stuff has been done in the past does not need to be carried into their present or their future. That you promise a whole new start, a fresh beginning, and the power to see that new beginning through to completion. Because you who began a good work in all of us, you will bring it to completion. It doesn't matter if our circumstances are financial lack. It doesn't matter if our circumstances are a physical shortcoming. It doesn't matter if our circumstances are the opposition of others or a reputation that's been carried. You have begun a powerful work in our hearts, and you will outwork that. And that means that what you started in us will be outworked through us. And you will do something powerful and profound as we surrender to Christ, rather than subject ourselves to our old life and mindsets. Help us to live in the power of this. Give us a revelation of your truth, we pray, over the coming days and weeks, so that we can make this the stories for the rest of our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. God bless you all. Thank you for putting up with my croaky throat.
Good, okay, well be blessed, have a great day. Please visit JP on the book stand. The book stand is Gospel Asia, and take a book and just be challenged by this morning. Let's take it with us. Have a great week. Thank you.